And then there were four. Australia's World Cup defence is officially over after being knocked out of the T20 World Cup at the hands of England and New Zealand. India and Pakistan have also progressed to the semi-finals. And on this edition of the Unplayable Podcast, we're going to be checking out just what went wrong for Australia and what might be next in their T20 pursuits. I'm Josh Schonafinger, and I'm joined, as always, by Louis Cameron. Louis, you've been following the Aussies around the country. So what happened?
Yeah, good question. It's probably what Australia are asking themselves at the moment. I mean, they end up with 3 wins, a washout and a loss, and they kind of look over at the other group, and Pakistan qualify after an amazing day yesterday, wasn't it? That that Netherlands win over South Africa is one no one saw coming, and in the end, Pakistan get through. Having a worse record than Australia in a really kind of perverse way of things finishing up. So yeah, I mean, Australia really have no one to blame but themselves, I think, and I think they would agree with that. And we'll probably delve into some of the reasons why it didn't quite click for them at this tournament. But yeah, it would be an interesting feeling for them, because they finished that game against Afghanistan on Friday night, still thinking that they might be in with a chance, right?
Well, that's right. Let's talk about that game at the Adelaide Oval. Australia made 8 for 168. It was Mitch Marsh with 45 and Glenn Maxwell was 54, doing most of the damage for the Aussies. But then Afghanistan, after falling to 6 for 103 in reply and looking like they were out of the contest, it was the Adelaide Oval fan favourite Rashid Khan with 48 not out, who nearly dragged the visitors over the line in what would have been a pretty special finish. However, Australia got the points, but not the net run rate boost that they needed, and England were able to knock off Sri Lanka the following day to clinch qualification.
Yeah, I mean, it was a familiar story, wasn't it, for the Australians, in terms of a similar kind of game to the Ireland one, where they felt like maybe they could have clinched a bigger victory, a victory that might have lifted their net run rate a little bit and allowed them to progress, even despite England beating Sri Lanka the next day. But, lower end run, tail end runs. It was Lorcan Tucker for Ireland, and it was Rashid Khan for Afghanistan, who kind of sunk the Aussies in that regard. I think that, one of the lessons that we're getting is that these teams, the lower ranked teams, I was going to say associate teams, but neither Ireland nor Afghanistan are associates anymore. They're full member nations, and that should be a good indicator. These guys are very, very good teams, and you might have been able to go into games, 6-7 years ago thinking that you could blow them off the park. And Australia could have potentially done that against Ireland if they'd held their catches, but I don't think you can really bank on it. I think you've just got to accept that. Yep, Australia should be beating these teams, but they're by no means easy beats. So they would have hated that it had to kind of come down to huge wins over those guys to make it possible. I personally think things went wrong a little bit earlier than that, but yeah, maybe we'll touch on that, in the coming minutes. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was the opening game of the season, or of the tournament, sorry, where they absolutely thrashed by New Zealand. And we spoke about it after that game, that maybe the net run rate was also going to become a factor even at that early point. They were bowled out in 17.1 overs. Should they have batted out the 20 and scrounged as many extra runs as they could have? In the end, maybe that wouldn't have made a massive difference, but yeah, it was just starting off the tournament on the wrong foot, wasn't it? And in the end, it killed them.
Yeah, it did. And it was interesting that neither of us really were 100% clear on how the net run rate worked after that first game. You'd like to think the Australians were. And yeah, you'd definitely look at that in terms of the tail could have made a few extra runs. It probably wouldn't have made a big difference. Like you can end up looking at this tournament in two ways: either that they should have been more clinical against Ireland and Afghanistan and recorded big wins. Personally, as I said before, I don't really think that was ever something that they should have been banking on. They lost it in the New Zealand game fair and square in the power plays of the respective innings. I mean, the way Finn Allen destroyed Australia and then Devon Conway went on with it in those games was effectively ended Australia's tournament. And then, to try and chase 190, 200 as they were in that game, they were just on the back foot from ball one. I think ultimately when you put it all together, the bowling was probably the bigger issue in terms of I think the batting, there was just enough. They made good scores against all the teams except for New Zealand, and they had a reasonable case to suggest that they were going up against a higher than par total, so you might give them a bit of an out for that. So I think the bowling is probably the bit where they'd identify some areas for improvement.
Well, that's an interesting point. So Mitchell Starc was left out of the 11 for that final match in favour of Kane Richardson. What does that say for Mitchell Starc's form? I mean, his tournament wasn't outstanding by his high standards. Mind you, he was playing a different role, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. And I think ultimately Starc and probably Pat Cummins are at crossroads in their careers in T20 cricket. I think. I mean, Cummins, his death bowling numbers we probably raised before were probably a bit of a concern for Australia coming into this tournament, and that there was an argument there that Kane Richardson and even Nathan Ellis are probably, just on numbers alone are actually better death bowlers right at the moment. The thing Cummins, and Hazelwood and Starc had to fall back on was this was a tournament for new ball bowlers and new ball swing bowlers and people who could shift it off the straight. And Cummins isn't a traditional new ball bowler, but he is, an excellent, just an excellent test, hard length kind of bowler. So I think all three of them would be asking why they haven't been able to get the kind of movement and trouble battles in the power play like other teams have. So that's a problem for all three of those fast bowlers. And when I say, he's at a crossroads, I mean, he's got a lot on his plate. He's the Test captain. He's now the ODI captain. He plays in the IPL. International T20 cricket, on top of that, is a lot. And you can't just kind of roll out the same stuff as you do in Test and one-day cricket anymore. T20s is a highly specialised format of the game. So by no means would anyone be writing him off, but I think they'd all need to have a real look at the time they're putting into T20 cricket. With Starc, it's a bit of an opposite issue in terms of his new ball numbers. So I think death bowling is less of a concern with him. I think hitting his Yorkers and even the way he can strike through the middle overs now are a positive. But the new ball stuff is where he's not quite nailing it like he was in the past. I mean, he used to be the new ball king, right? You think about the first ball of the Ashes last year, the first ball of the 2015 World Cup final. The numbers just suggest that he's not making the same impact in the power play. So that's another one for him where his Test career is going beautifully at the moment, and ODI cricket, he's one of the best ODI bowlers Australia's ever had. So again, for him, it's where does T20 fit into that? And for Australia's selectors, how do they manage these those two fast bowlers in particular who are now getting to 30 years old? What's best for them going forward? On that, I think Hazelwood and Zampa, I think they're locks for me. You look forward to the next World Cup. I think what you get from Hazelwood as an all-round package is excellent. I think he's the leader of this attack now. It's amazing that they're in that position. And Adam Zampa, likewise, I think is an excellent T20 bowler. So, potentially some interesting conversations to be had around the other fast bowling spots.
Probably also another source of disappointment for the Aussies is that pace bowling is considered their strength, and the other quicks around the tournament have had really good tournaments, and perhaps the Aussie quicks didn't have as big impact as they probably would have expected. Now, just before I forget, someone who was a great T20 bowler was Shane Watson. You're hopefully going to be chatting to him straight after this chat, so looking forward to that. I do want to just talk about the semi-finals, though, that are coming up. It's New Zealand and Pakistan at the SCG on November 9, and India and England at the Adelaide Oval on November 10. Lou, if you had to put your hat in the ring and tell us who's going to claim it from here, who would you be leaning towards?
I think India will win the game against England. I think they've been the standout team for me in this tournament. I mean, South Africa were the ones until they lost to the Netherlands. I really thought that we were potentially looking at an India-South Africa final, but Inexplicable is all I can say of another white ball major tournament collapse for South Africa when the heat was on. Pakistan, New Zealand. You'd say on form, New Zealand should be winning that. They've had the better tournament. Pakistan have only just snuck in. The thing that can always win you any game of cricket is excellent bowling, though. And Pakistan arguably have the best bowling attack at this tournament, particularly in the pace bowling stock. So certainly wouldn't write them off. If I had to guess, I'd say India New Zealand final at the MCG. And I just think India are the most well balanced team, and the team that have exploited the conditions the best. I mean, even watching them again last night, the way Arshdeep Singh and Bhuvneshwar Kumar are swinging the ball, fantastic adjusting to conditions. It's been a really interesting World Cup in that regard.
Last time we chatted, you hinted that maybe the Kookaburras are swinging more this tournament. Have you delved any deeper into that philosophy?
No, I haven't. But I mean, it seems like it's certain grounds that it seems to be happening more at. I mean, Australia are unfortunate in terms of they didn't get to play at the MCG, where it seems to be swinging heaps every time India play there. Got nothing more to back up whether that's a real thing or not around the Kookaburras, but anecdotal or just watching it just seems like it's swinging and seeming a lot more. Although you'd probably say Australia didn't really get a whole heap of it in their games, which maybe that's a conditions thing, maybe it's a bowler thing. I'm not sure.
Certainly not compared to the other teams. Now, if you mentioned earlier that the next T20 World Cup, that'll be in 2024, held jointly by the West Indies and the USA, of all places. And you reckon Josh Hazlewood and Adam Zampa are going to be there. You've also done a bit of preparation for this segment. You're going to run us through who you think will be lining up for Australia in 2 years' time. Why don't you just run us through from top to bottom, and then we can have a bit of a chat about who's made your team.
Okay, I've had a bit of a crack at an 11, and then an extra 4 players to be in the squad. There might be a few like slashes and asterisks, so bear with me as I go through it. Opening the batting, I think Cameron Green is probably given first crack after some of the promising signs we've seen from him. I've got David Warner asterisk in there. He will be, I think, 37 or 38 by the time the next tournament comes around. So, odds would say that might be a bridge too far. If that is the case, I think they need a left-hander. And one of the issues, I think, with Australian T20 cricket at the moment is there's not a whole heap of left-handed batters pushing their case, particularly in the middle order. So I've got Darcy Short or Travis Head in that opening spot next to Green. And then the middle order is pretty similar to what it looks like now. I've got Marsh, Maxwell, Stoinis, David, and I've just slotted Inglis in there instead of Matt Wade, who I think he probably, he said that this World Cup would probably be his last, and I think that'll probably be the case. So Inglis, I think, slops in at maybe 4 or 5 there, can kind of balance things out, and that can push David right down to 7 if required. And then my bowlers, I've got Hazlewood and Zampa. I haven't picked Stark or Cummins. I'm not saying that, I'm not writing them off, but I'm suggesting that if they look elsewhere, that you might end up with Daniel Sams at number 8 as a really good lower order hitter. And it kind of replaces what Cummins been able to do. Is his batting in T20 cricket, I think, is a real positive. So I think Sams can cover some of that. And I think his bowling as a left armer can potentially replace a bit of what they're losing from Mitchell Stark. And then Nathan Ellis, for me, is the death bowler in that team. His numbers are getting better and better, and he seems to be a better case for international cricket every time he plays in it. The reserves I've got Agar, and he'd probably play some games alongside Zampa, depending on pitches in the US and the West Indies. I've got Riley Meredith in there, but there's a whole bunch of different pace bowlers that they could look at for that spot. Felipe or McDermott is my backup top order batter / wicketkeeper.
Okay, you don't want to make a call on.
Okay, so if I had to pick, I'd probably go Felipe. I just think he's a touch more versatile, and he probably wicket keeps a bit more often. So that'd be my backup keeper bat. And then in terms of a spinner, I thought about Tanvir Sangha, Mitch Swepson, and Peter Hatzeglu for this spot. I'm going to go with Tanvir Sangha. I just think I'm not picking it on current form. I'm picking on where guys could be in 2 years' time, and I think Sangha could potentially make that leap. So that's an early crack at a 15. What do you reckon?
I don't mind that at all, actually. I mean, a lot might come down to what the pitchers in the US are going to do. I mean, we don't have much data to suggest what they're going to roll out over there, do they? But Tanvir Sangha is a great shout. I love him. He's still very young and spent some time around the Aussie squad when they went to New Zealand in 2021. So definitely he's on the radar of the selectors. Interesting, though, that the middle order, as you said, remains pretty much the same. And I'm sure Andrew McDonald won't be making wholesale changes to this squad, but there might be a recommendation or a suggestion that, if this team that hasn't made the semis, should there be, more than just a handful of differences that you've pointed out there?
Yeah, I don't think it's an interesting spot for the Aussie team because I don't think the middle order batting is necessarily a major issue. I think at times Stoinis has looked really dangerous. Maxwell was fantastic in that last game against Afghanistan and really rescued Australia. I think Tim David didn't really see the best of him and probably didn't get the chance to see the best of him. He had a hamstring issue that ruled him out of the last game. I think he's going to be an excellent T20 player for Australia. And the sample size on him is just too small at the moment. And I think Inglis, his signs as a guy who can hit to different areas, not an out and out power hitter, although he does have a bit of that. He's an interesting counterpoint, I think, to those other three guys and Mitch Marsh. And particularly when you look at it and there's no lefties in that middle order. And I think having someone like Inglis and also Maxwell who can reverse sweep and switch hit, they're crucial in terms of being able to make up for the kind of headache that having left-handers can present to bowling captains. So I'm not too worried about the middle order. I think it's funny. It's actually the opening spots they need to think about and the bowling, which is fast bowling, which are traditionally the two bits of Australia's T20 side where they haven't had to worry that much about in the past.
The left-handers is a really interesting point, isn't it? Because now we just sort of assume that you have to have the right-left combination. But as you pointed out off air earlier, India are flying at the minute and their whole top seven, Rishabh Pant aside when he plays, is right-handers. So maybe it's not necessarily as big a factor as maybe we assume it is.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you can't pick lesser players because they're left-handers, in the middle order just for the sake of it. Yeah, India's a great example. You look at, Surya Kumar Yadav. I mean, he's a left-hander, right-hander, all rolled into one. Just the ability to and when I say that, I mean he can hit the ball to all parts of the ground. And I think that's the thing with left-handers is it becomes more difficult for bowling teams when you have right-left combinations in terms of protecting different bits of the ground. You might so much of what gets dictated in T20 cricket now is an off spinner will come on to bowl maybe to two left-handers and they'll do it because the long side of they're spinning the ball to the long side of the boundary kind of thing. So these are all the little considerations that come into it. You can't then bring that same off spinner onto bowl if you've got a right and a left hand player because one of them will be hitting to the shorter side. That's the kind of thing that comes into it, especially in tournaments where you have a lot of games on the same grounds and you end up playing it on pitches closer to one side than the other. So that's the reason you want them. But yeah, India are showing that it's not that important potentially.
It's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out. Now, Lou, we'll chat after the semi-finals and do a little final preview, I reckon. And you're about to go and chat to Shane Watson.
I'm here with Shane Watson on the Unplayable Podcast, whose new book, Winning the Inner Battle, is out now in all good bookstores, probably all the bad ones as well. It's a fantastic book. I really enjoyed reading it, Shane. It's probably the first thing worth noting is that it's not a typical cricketer's book. It's not this happened on this tour and this happened on the next tour. it's a bit different. What made you want to write it?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. The only way you can buy this book is on my website.
I didn't even check. Okay, let's re-record everything. Yeah.
Are you sure?
No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
They know. They'll remember it now. Yeah. Now that they know they can't get it in the bookstore.
There's no books. I'm self-publishing it. So the only way you can get it is on shanewatson.au. shanewatson.au, and you can buy the paperback, the ebook, and the audiobook is not far away.
Right.
Because I'm self-publishing, it's not far away.
We can record it right now if you like. You just if you just want to start reading from chapter 1, just go for it.
Yeah, it'd be easier. It would have been easier from the edit anyway. But so that's it's. You can only get it on my website, shanewatson.au. But look, the reason why I wrote this book is because I want this information to get out to everyone. I want everyone to have the chance and opportunity to be able to read this information that I was so fortunate to get educated on in 2015. So I was 34. It was after the T20, the One Day World Cup that we won here in Australia. And I was going through a tough time performance-wise and career-wise. And I got introduced to a guy who from the US, a mental skills guru from the US, who I ended up going and spending a few days going through his program and understanding this information. And it was so profound, this information, because it was so easy to understand. This guy, Dr. Jacques Dallaire, knew nothing about cricket, but all he knew is about high performance and about how people's minds work, good and bad, and how to educate people on it. So from that time on, I spent 2 days with him. I was like, I've got to get this information out to as many people as possible, which I've been doing over the last 4 years. I implemented this information over my last 4 years of playing T20 cricket around the world, and set up a business coaching this information. And now I've had time to be able to put together a book, so it's even more readily available, this information. So yes, it's a cricket specific book as around the examples that I give, and in different times in my career and different situations in my life and career where I use this information, good and bad. But outside of that, it's more so it's an education book, a mental skills education book, not just your standard autobiography or something like that. It's certainly nothing like that. It's there to get this information out to as many people as possible, because for me, this information should be taught in schools. Mental skills information should be taught at schools, because it's one of the most important skills that we can develop, life skills that we can develop. For me, there's two really important life skills that we don't get taught at school. One is mental skills, to understand how to navigate your way around life and how to get the best out of yourself from a performance point of view, so you can access all your skills that you've got inside of you. But also financial literacy. That's not like my strength. I've had to educate myself on that. But there's a few people out there who are doing that very well. The Barefoot Investor, Scott Paper's doing an amazing job with that to dumb it down so people can understand and educate themselves. But for me, those two things are the most important life skills, and mental skills is what I've been educated on. It's what I know incredibly well now. So that's the reason why the books come out.
It's a fascinating genesis from it, and you wrote in the book about how meeting Will Power, the race car driver, kind of put you onto that. I'm really interested in this initial meeting with this guy Jacques Dallaire. I mean, to think that you had to go all the way to North Carolina in the States to learn these lessons. I mean, what did he make of you? What did he know who you were? Did he know anything about cricket?
No, he didn't know really anything at all about cricket. All he knew is that, he got introduced, Will Power introduced me to Jacques after I met Will Power at the Dally M's. It was Dally M's, 2015. So random. I've never been to the Dally M's before, and he was only out in Australia for a couple of weeks after he'd won the IndyCar championship. So it was just a random meeting, as life happens at times. But then he connected me with Jacques, and I had a conversation with Jacques just over the phone for half an hour. I was like, oh my God, this guy, this information I've never heard some of this stuff, so simple. And I was like, geez, okay, I've got nothing to lose. I've got nothing to lose. I'm most probably going to retire. Well, I'm most probably going to retire because I can't access my skills. I think that they're gone. And so I had nothing to lose, flew over and just spent 2 days going through as a really deep program that he that I went through over 2 days. And I just knew, flying back from North Carolina, from Charlotte, I just knew that I had all the skills now to be able to turn things around. all the mental skills that I never had an understanding. I'd fallen into the right mindsets at certain times throughout my career through circumstances. And so I knew how to, I fell into the right mindset to have some really good performances, but to understand the control that I had over my mind to direct myself into those performances, certainly that never happened because I didn't know that information. So, and from then on, then I just kept working through and troubleshooting these skills that I had over the next sort of four years or so, and then by coaching this information now, just makes me know it inside out as well. So, but this guy was just like a bit of, in a way, a mad scientist. Jacques had been doing it for 45 years, developed the program, developed this whole program over 45 years of working with high performance people. He started in F1 and then moved on into motorsport and special forces and that sort of thing. So he's distilled the program down and the information down into a really easy to understand way. And again, he knew nothing about cricket, which was a great thing because it was just the information for me to then apply it into cricket was just so simple and so powerful. So I'm so grateful that I have this opportunity to be able to spread the word on this powerful information that Jacques put together over a lot of years.
I imagine one of the things that would have been relatable for him in terms of what you were at the point of your career that you were going to him was, around death and around tragedy. And we know Phil Hughes had had a big impact on you and a lot of other players, Shane. Was that as a starting point? I mean, how big was that in terms of changing your mental outlook on the game, and B, how did he kind of help you deal with that part of it?
Yeah, well, that was where my mindset shifted significant. Well, in a huge way after that tragic event of Phil Hughes, and it's just because for me the innocence of cricket was taken away from just thinking that you could, you're facing a fast bowler and you could get hurt, but never in the ever did you ever contemplate that event happening. So, and I suppose the great thing about going and working with Jacques is, he'd been working with people who had been through similar experiences in different sort of, whether it's race motorsport, whether that's special forces, fighter pilots, where the fear for some people has arisen, and just making you understand how to be able to overcome that fear, to be able to not allow that fear to affect your performances, to bring the best, all the skills that you have. So it was certainly the information that was just so powerful to be able to sort of just make me understand how I can still, just to be able to overcome from a performance perspective, overcome that fear that was so raw still, to be able to not let it affect my performances from then on.
And then from out of that, I mean, one of the things I really took out of the book was basically the 45-minute routine that you developed in those back 3 or 4 years of your career, Shane. Like how, maybe explain to the listeners what that routine consisted of and how transformative it was.
Yeah, so that 45-minute preparation routine that I refined over my whole career. But then when I was working through and understood this information, then it was very, very specific. So one thing that I always did was before I knew this information was I worried a lot and I thought a lot about everything that was going on. So if, for example, before a test match or in the lead up to a test match 3 days out, I'd be thinking about who I was coming up against, even when I was walking down the road to go for lunch or something like that, I'd be thinking about facing Jimmy Anderson or Stuart Broad, or this game's coming up, I really need to score runs. It's a big time, it's a big Ashes series. And I was thinking about it all the time, even when I was trying not to think about it, I was. And then because of that, I used to burn myself out mentally from a mental energy point of view, and I didn't know it. I didn't know that I was doing that, but just human nature. That's what I was processing. So once I knew this information, I just always made sure that I set aside 45 minutes in the lead up to going to a game to be able to know that was the time where I did work through my scenarios, the technical, the mental checklist, look over footage of me when I was playing at my best. So just to reinforce my mindset when I was at my best and watching footage of it, but also my technical best. So working through that. And once I stepped through the technical and mental checklist and watching video footage of myself, then I would meditate. So the meditation was a way to be able to try and regenerate as much mental energy as I could that I'd burnt in the lead up, whether through that whole day, because I only applied this in T20 cricket because I'd retired from every other form or got dropped. So I was only doing it in T20 cricket, but then 20 minutes of meditation would regenerate as much mental energy as I could, and then I'd walk down to go to the bus. So that was my routine. But setting aside those 45 minutes, I put it in a box, that time into a box. So as soon as a thought would come up around it, like before that 45 minutes, as soon as a thought came up around, I could be facing this, or it's a big game, it's a IPL final, I'd just catch that thought and just redirect it to, I know I've got 45 minutes set aside, and I'll think about that then and just think about something else, do something else. And for me, my default, anytime I started to think about something I shouldn't have, was just think about a song. So that was my easy default, to be able to just go, you know what, put my mind on neutral so I wasn't overthinking any situation. And the easiest way for me to do that was just putting a song in my head.
I really like the example that I think you said the first time you used having a song in your head was during that innings, the 100 you made against India at the SCG, not too long after that. How did that process kind of play out with that innings?
Yeah, so that was start of February, I think, end of January, start of February, that game. So I had the whole Big Bash really of just refining that information that I'd been taught, because I went and saw Jacques at the end of September or start of October in 2015, and then that was in 2016 in Feb, that game against India. So I'd refined the process throughout the Big Bash around in between balls, just jamming a song into my head just to make sure my mind was on neutral. Again, in the lead up to the game, that was my default, to make sure that I wasn't overthinking anything, and that was just such a that was an amazing time, because it was the first time again where I'd had on the international stage, I'd had a performance where I was in control of my thoughts, and I was really very deliberate on what I was thinking. As in between balls, I was just putting a song in my head, trusting what I felt, because I was captain for that game as well, and batting and bowling. So I was very, very, very diligent and disciplined around what my thoughts were. So when I was captaining, not overthinking what a bowling change or a fielding change, was just trusting what I felt. I was tapping into my unconscious mind to trust my gut feel. So, and that's where the power in that decision making is just so incredible, and it's so efficient mental energy wise, but also it's so accurate. So I was trusting that, and then again when I was batting, I was just trusting what I felt, the right matchup, the right conditions. In between balls, again, I was just putting my mind on neutral, and it's just one of those days. Yes, things fell my way as well. I got a couple of free hits from Jasprit Bumrah early on my innings to get innings going as well. Just certainly the B factors went my way through that game as well. But because I was just so deliberate in everything that I did technically, but also then mentally, to be able to, the satisfaction to know that all that work that I'd done over the previous 3 months, around about 3 months of working through this information and applying it correctly, was just so satisfying.
I watched the highlights back of that innings this morning, actually, and just watching it with the added context of knowing what you were kind of doing. I have one question. What was the song?
Oh yeah, look, I can never remember the song. That's the one thing, because the songs that I pick up are normally the songs that I might have been listening to before the game. So I'd always listen to music as I was on the bus or driving to the game. But then it could be the song that's on at the ground as well. Do you know what I mean? So if there's a song that's on the ground that's a little bit catchy and it's just there, I'll just jam that song in. Yeah, so that's the one thing that I don't know exactly what song it is. It's more so whichever one's available to me right at that moment, whether it's one around the ground or one I've been listening to in the past, that I jam it in there. That's the one thing that I've just forced into my mind no matter what, because that's when I know my mind's on neutral, and then I'm accessing all my instincts, my gut feel, my unconscious sort of mind decision making, because my mind's on neutral.
It's interesting. I remember David Warner during the World Cup in 2019. He actually batted with headphones in, like little, like the Apple earphones in, and he was like listening to Lewis Capaldi or something like that. Yeah. Like I wonder if that's him kind of tapping into the same thing and almost forcing the the song into his head.
Well, that's right. I know. Michael Clark was certainly did that. He always had his earphones on, waiting to bat in a Test match, and then I knew he always had a song in his head. I didn't know why he did it. It obviously worked amazingly well. He's able to bat for such long periods of time. Glenn McGrath did it as well. I remember him telling me that he did it again, but I just didn't ask. Whether I didn't ask why, or they didn't know exactly why they did it. They did it and it worked, and it really helped them. But yeah, Dave Warner, I didn't know that about him, but that's certainly one way of being able to just make sure that you're tuning out to the world around you and just tuning into your mind on default to make your mind chilling until you need to be finally focused on watching that ball coming out.
It's interesting you talk there about Glenn McGrath. One of the other little bits from the book about I remember you said that you saw Brett Lee watching highlights of himself on the team bus, and you thought, get a load of this bloke, like he's watching his own highlights, and then you actually realise later the benefit of it.
Yeah, that's it. Brett Lee used to be the butt of a lot of jokes on the bus. Like, people used to take the piss out of him quite a bit because he was just like it seemed very self-indulgent at the time. It is like, oh, good on you, mate. Like, because obviously his bowled 160 Ks and stumps flying and seeing the ball like bounces and just so it seemed very self-indulgent at the time, and people used to take the piss out of it. And I was certainly one of those as well. Being as Brett Lee's one of my best mates in the world, so it was all done in the right spirit. And then I asked him now, after knowing this information, the reason why he did it, and that was to build his confidence up, to be able to tap into the best version of him by watching that footage of him bowling at his best. That's just what then he took into the game, that super version of himself. Whereas everyone else, like I think some other guys might have been watching footage of themselves, I think, to reinforce their good habits or even their mindset that they needed. But it's certainly no one ever talked about it. They certainly didn't do it on the team bus like Brett Lee did. But he knew what was going on, and it certainly worked for him. And it was a method, it's a method that worked really, really well for him. But no one really knew why he did it. But he just kept taking it on because he knew it worked.
Yeah, no, it certainly worked. One of the other things you touched on was the idea of that almost being like a finite amount of mental energy that you've got, and you kind of list it out. I mean, like social media has been a big one in terms of what a well documented distraction for players. One of the ones that surprised me a bit was video games, and you suggested that the video games are potentially more of an issue in terms of burning players' mental energy before matches than anyone else I've kind of heard talk about that. Yeah, why do you think that?
Yeah, well, just the research is very strong around the overstimulation that computer games do create in the mind, in the brain, and the overstimulation means that it can take, especially for growing minds in particular, the overstimulation of computer games can take a number of days for your brain to be able to regenerate that mental energy because of just being so overstimulated with all those different things that are going on. And that's just one thing that I've seen a lot when I was playing. A lot of guys used to just burn time and make time go by on tour by playing computer games and gaming. And it's certainly become even more prevalent now because of the online gaming aspect, where you can tune in, you can play against and play with your mates from all around the world. And it's certainly a big culture in cricket and in around the T20 leagues that I played as well. And obviously for some, it's a career. Like some are professional gamers; they get paid to game outside of playing cricket. So that's great. But everyone's got to be very, very aware of how much that overstimulation of your mind by gaming and gaming late into the night and then trying to sleep after it as well. Everyone knows when you're gaming, or whether you're like watching YouTube or scrolling through social media, then when you try to go to sleep after that, if it's later in night, it's hard for your mind to be able to switch off, and quality of sleep most of the time is not great. So you're not giving your body a chance to be able to regenerate that mental energy alone. So people need to be very, very diligent and careful about how they use their mental energy. And if they really want to be as good a cricketer as they possibly can, then just you game in that, do it. Of course, certainly never saying not to do something, but just be wise around when you do it, and then understanding that if you do it, then if you want to be the best that you possibly can be, and you've got all the control over your mind and the mental energy to be able to react to the best of your ability, execute your skills, all that muscle memory that you're trying to tap into, that if your mental energy's depleted, then your ability to be able to execute your skill and your decision making is significantly reduced. So I suppose in the end it's a choice, and I knew that I wanted to be the best cricketer I want to be. I hated that feeling it's a shocking feeling knowing that you didn't perform how you wanted to, you let your team down. So I was willing to do whatever I needed to be able to sacrifice whatever I needed to give myself the best chance of performing in every game.
I imagine for a lot of those guys who are really into it, like it's a competitive thing as well, right? Like it's hard for, and I imagine, there's probably times where you get a little bit where, you're not playing anymore, and that competitive thing just, you're not getting that same outlet. Like, do you have some sympathy? Are there alternative ways that guys can kind of, exercise that competitive instinct, I suppose?
Oh, there's certainly plenty of other ways. There's other things you can do for sure. There's other pastimes that you can do that still give you that competitive experience that everyone enjoys for sure. And I'm certainly not here to say don't game. I'm certainly not saying that. It's more so just be aware of how much you do game, because the overstimulation, the awareness that the overstimulation on your brain can mean that you have torched a lot of your mental energy in the lead up to a game that you are playing. It's just the awareness around it. So then you might just be more selective when you do it, more selective the time and when you do it and how long you do it for. But then also if you do it, then make sure you're doing things to be able to replenish that mental energy, whether that's through meditation, which is one powerful way, but also sleep's the other way to be able to regenerate that mental energy if you can get a decent night's sleep after it.
Yeah. And one of the other bits that you're kind of talking about there is that tapping into your unconscious mind. And I found that a really illuminating part of the book, Shane. And I found it an interesting counterpoint, I suppose, in terms of T20 cricket is so much of, we hear about matchups and data and analytics. And one of the things that you're kind of actually advocating for is potentially, switching off that a little bit and actually kind of going, my gut feel is more important and more valuable to me than a lot of that other stuff. How do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is your preparation. So in your preparation, it's very important to be able to understand what the analytics are and go through the data enough. So you've put that into your internal computer, into your unconscious mind, so you know that you've got that information there. So then when you go into the game, then it is just trusting what you feel, tapping into your gut feel, is your unconscious mind, just processing all of your experiences that you've ever had throughout your career, but then also taking into consideration that information that you've just recently put into your mind around the data, and then trusting what you feel on the field. So, for example, if there was a matchup for me that statistically and the data was really good, if I just, even before I face one ball and I'm going, okay, this is my matchup, I'm going no matter what the data says it. Every time I've played this guy, I can take him down, take this bowler down. But if I don't give myself one ball to go, okay, how is it today? What's he doing today? Is he bowling slightly differently to what he does normally? Is the ball reacting differently off the wicket than it normally does? But if I just don't even take into those factors into consideration and go, nah, the data says this, that's when it's high risk. You got more chance of being exposed and getting out. So that's where it's great to be able to put that information, that data, into your internal computer. But then it is trusting what you feel out in the middle to be able to make the right decisions. And that's where, if you don't get that balance right, that's where the data can just take over and people just do things. It's high risk instead of actually this is what it feels right, is the right thing to do right now, whether it's a right ball to bowl right now or the right field placement or the right bowling change right now, instead of just only taking the data as gospel and not allowing your understanding and your intuition of the game of cricket through all your experiences. You're not allowing that to come through.
One of the other interesting bits, Shane, that stood out for me was how big an impact the IPL had on your career, and particularly around not just around the back end of your career. I mean, you kind of talk about it, being influential the whole way through. And I think it's interesting, given Australia got knocked out of a World Cup over the weekend, and there's always talk about how the IPL fits in with international schedules. Maybe just for your own career, why was the IPL so transformative for you, I suppose?
Well, the IPL was so transformative for me because in 2008 I was on the Australian cricket scrap heap in a way, because I'd been injured on and off for, 3 years in particular. And it got to a stage, and I fully get it, that I just hadn't been fit for long enough. So people were getting frustrated. I was performing pretty well, but then I'd get injured. So, I understand that my opportunities were starting to, was starting not to be there. And then the IPL came along. And fortunately, Shane Warne was at the Rajasthan Royals, was captain coach of the Rajasthan Royals, and he was always an incredible supporter of me, even with my time that I went and played and replaced him at Hampshire to be able to help evolve my cricket and get improve my cricket. So to be able to have him looking after me and been able to play the whole IPL as well, because there was a test series on at that time. So there was a West Indies test series in 2008 where the high-profile Aussie players, they played like 2 or 3 games of the IPL and then had to come home to Brisbane to have a 2-week camp and then go to the West Indies to play the test series. Whereas because I wasn't in the test squad, because I'd been dropped, and fair enough, because I was injured on and off, then I was able to play the whole IPL. And it was a perfect storm for me because physically I was as good as I'd ever been, because it had been a year process of rebuilding my body, thanks to Victor Popov, who was up in Brisbane. And then I'd worked really hard on my power hitting over the previous sort of 4 years because of where I was batting in one-day cricket for Australia, batting at number 7 and 8. So it was a perfect storm. And then having Shane Warne guide me and support me and look after me and give me opportunities, it was meant to be. So that was a time where I was able to play the whole tournament. It was a world-class tournament. So, and then my cricket just sort of took off from there. But the balance is now, and this is what I really struggle to get my head around, is I knew when I played the IPL, and so from that time onwards, yes, I got picked for the one day series in the West Indies straight after that, straight on the back of my IPL, or the first IPL. From then on, I played international cricket just about all the way through, and I knew though if I played the IPL, then I absolutely could not get rested for any Australian games. And Ricky was my captain as well, and he looked after me playing wise. But it was always, if I play the IPL, then I have to play every game for Australia. And the only game that I ever really got rested for was a Perth game, a one day where I had to fly back and forth pretty quickly, and I rested for that. But that was it, and that's where I struggle to get my head around how things have shifted significantly for the current generation of players who play the IPL, but then they're able to take like a couple of tours off to freshen up for Australia. That's the thing that's just so foreign to me, because I know exactly what was going through. It wasn't just me. Other people were in the same boat who played the IPL and just knew that, you know what, if you burn yourself out, the thing where you've got to sacrifice is the IPL, because international cricket, playing for your country, is the number one. And IPL is an amazing experience and an amazing opportunity, but it comes second to playing for your country. So that's where it's foreign to me, and I struggle to get my head around exactly the situation right now.
And that's changing quickly, right? With the extra power that IPL teams are having, and that they're talking about buying. Well, they're not talking about it. They've got teams in other T20 leagues around the world. Well, I mean, playing devil's advocate, some of these guys might say that, me playing in the IPL, I'm going to get more out of that than a 5-game T20 series against Bangladesh or against West Indies, or I'm just picking those teams out of nowhere. What would you what would you say to that?
Oh, look, I get that, and in the end, it's an individual call. It's an individual's call to go, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to play and commit to playing cricket for my country and seeing what those opportunities are? Maybe, whether they're me playing all the time or whether I'm sort of in and out. But I want to commit to playing for my country for as long as I possibly can. But there's obviously another decision to go, okay, well, if everything does go really well and I do perform and play cricket for Australia, then I'm going to be playing all year round if I'm playing all 3 formats. So, and then the IPL, that is the only window where I have time off. So I've just got to. That's a decision I have to make whether I do that and know that I'm going to be burnt out and I'm going to have to manage that as well as I can, or there's going to be opportunities that are fast approaching where a player makes the decision to say, you know what, I'm not going to play international cricket, whether they're at the back end of their career or whether they're starting, and go, you know what, I don't want to be. It'd be an amazing opportunity to be able to play cricket for my country, but I just want to be able to play 9 months of the year or 6 months of the year, or whatever it is, get paid this amount of money and then do some other things, whether it's training, preparation, whether it's actually doing stuff outside of cricket to upskill myself for the next phase of my life after my cricket finishes. And that's the decisions that are going to have to be made quite soon, because that situation's very fast approaching. That's come up. It's been coming for a while, and now it's right in everyone's faces. So the individual in the end just has to make a call and make a decision on what they want to do. But again, I'll keep going back to it. I still can't get my head around how you can play the IPL and then rest for tours. Yeah, I can't get my head around that. Anyway, maybe I'm old school in that way, I suppose.
Yeah. No, and it's a fascinating discussion around someone I want to ask you about, Cameron Green in particular, right? I mean, that's a guy whose star is on the rise in all three formats, and we've gotten a little bit of a taste of it in T20 cricket just recently. I've got no doubt, I'm not sure about you, Shane, that he's going to be in high demand when the next IPL auction rolls around. Given how we went in India earlier this year. I mean, as a guy who went through a lot of the same things, a lot of the same expectations as a young all-rounder, what would you advise him to do?
Well, the one thing that I just love watching him play. He's all the skills, the skills that he's equipped with at such a young age is just it blows me away, because I know where I was at my career at that stage, at his age, and it's phenomenal to see what he's able to do, and the understanding that he has of his game is just, and that's across all formats, is something that's it's rare. Someone like him doesn't come along very often at all in the history of the game. So so now with the opportunities that are going to come up with the IPL, again, it's just going to be a decision that he's going to have to make. It's understanding, if I do play the IPL, and obviously he's going to be incredibly well rewarded for it because of his skill that he's got and the match winning ability that he has across the board, then IPL teams are going to be jumping all over or falling all over themselves to be able to get him. But with that, it means that he's going to be playing cricket all year round, and to be able to manage that even from a body point of view, because he is still young, that's going to be his biggest challenge. And then so how does he manage that? So at the moment it looks like it's from afar, he's managing it very well, and Cricket Australia managing him very well, the way they're using him when they bowl him, when they don't bowl him. But that'll certainly crank up if he goes and plays the IPL, because he'll be expected to bowl all the time. So in the end, that'll just be a decision that he's going to have to make. But there's certainly a hybrid there for someone like him. There's a hybrid there, whether he plays the IPL, whether he plays part of the IPL. There's definitely a hybrid there, because it's a collective management of someone like Cameron Green. It's a collective management of him, whether that's with the IPL team and Cricket Australia, to work through to be able to just allow this guy to be the best that he can be and manage him as well as we can, because in time his body will get more resilient. The more he just continues, body gets used to doing what he wants it to do. But it needs to be a collective management if he goes to play the IPL to look after him, because he's just, as I said, a player like him with the skills that he has, they don't come along very often.
One of the other things he can do is read Shane Watson's book, which is called "Winning the Inner Battle." I'm sure he's across it. I think the young players are better these days, aren't they? I'm about to let you go, Shane, but maybe one more on just young players in terms of how they access some of this information that you're talking about. I mean, when you were 16, 17 coming through, you spelt it out that it wasn't really there. Do you think a guy like Green and others are accessing that information at an earlier age?
But what I'm hearing, though, certainly there are people out there who are helping educate these young cricketers with this information. But it's more so but what I'm hearing, it's more so the ones who are very they are looking to push the limits of how good they can be, so it's not just readily available, and also you've got to be fortunate enough to be able to be connected with the right person who's got that information, who can help educate that that individual. So, and again, that's why the reason why I've released this book is so this information is readily available for everyone. You don't have to be very lucky to be in the pathway where you get access to this one person in particular who has got this mental skills information that can just help you unlock the best version of you every time you step out. It's not, this information is not readily available and hasn't been. And that's what I was so obsessed with cricket, and I still absolutely love the game. But as a 16, 17-year-old, I just wanted to do everything that I possibly could to be the best cricketer I could be, and I did that. I was pushing limits technically, physically, but there was never any like really good sound mental skills information where I could just start implementing those mental skills and just bringing all those three components together at a younger age. So, that's the whole genesis of the reason why this book's out there, to make it more readily available. So, and the good thing with the book, you can do it in your own privacy. I know that sometimes if you see people reading a mental skills book, the unconscious bias is, oh geez, okay, you might have a few issues,
a few demons going on there.
A few demons going on. So the good thing about a book, you can do it in your own privacy, and then once you understand the information, then you can then you can come and talk about it because you're armed with the information that you need to be able to work through it.
I think they say 50 Shades of Grey was particularly popular on Kindle over the last few years because of maybe some of those same reasons. It's not winning the inner battle isn't quite that same genre, but it's a fantastic read. No, nonetheless, you know how to get it now. Shane Watson's told you. Shane Watson is the name of the author. Go to his website to get the book. Shane, thanks very much for your time, mate.
Pleasure, Louis. It's great to chat to you, mate.